Chapter 111 Thoughts. The destruction that surrounded me after the wave was over astounded me. Not in the amount of it, but the ease with which it had been accomplished. The imagery of bodies and blood strewn everywhere inside the walls was not new to me, but this was the first time that it felt so effortless. Usually at the end of battles, my body was tired from exertion and my breathing was hitched. My mana was empty and there was a certain toll on my body the wave extracted. This didn't feel like that. Sure, I had some superficial wounds and some of my blood was spilled, but the level of destruction didn't match the effort I felt I put in. The boost from my spirit anchor was clearly visible to see. With it now formed, there was only one thing left on the to-do list before I got to evolve. Reach body of wood. After the wave, there wasn't a lot to do. Working on autopilot was enough to clean up the bodies at this point from doing it so many times and gave my mind a chance to think about other things. The 28th wave was over, leaving only 2 left. Just over a week remained of the tutorial we had been teleported to. In a week and 2 days we would be put back on a changed Earth. It was both exciting and worrying. We knew somewhat about the conditions we would be returning to, and that was cause for alarm. Saying nothing of the people, the environment alone would be actively trying to kill us. The plants that inhabited the planet changed dramatically during the terraforming, or so we were told, evolving and mutating far beyond what they once were. The animals too. I wasn't as concerned about initial survival as I was sustained survival. From the information of previous integrations and data on past planets being terraformed, enlightened races came out of the tutorial with a similar level to the beasts who were left behind. Now that was on average and said nothing of the statistical outliers that were bound to pop up. Beasts who did well in their game of King of the Hill would reach greater heights than those who didn't perform as well. The same was true for people in the tutorial. Depending on the tutorial, people could return from anywhere from early F rank all the way to well into E rank. There was a lot of variation depending on how and what the participant did during the tutorial. Take our tutorial for example. Austin was the highest level person I knew, and he was a handful of levels into E rank, while some of the fighters in Tracy's camp were only in the mid-30s and low 40s. The gulf in levels would only get wider the more time elapsed. People's ambition and drive for power would delineate the populace in terms of levels. So when we were dumped back on Earth, the monsters would be about the same level as the ones we were fighting during the waves. Which was not that threatening to me by this point. It was their continued growth that was worrying. Carving out a place to live was going to be difficult. Taming the new environment and founding a place for civilization weren't going to be easy tasks. The more I learned about what the planet was being turned into, the more daunting the task of founding a city seemed. But that was a problem for future Chris. Present Chris still needed to figure out what to do with his new free time. To reach body of wood, there was no need to spend days in pesky meditation or introspection. All that was required was the painful and merciless destruction of the body on a cellular level. It sounded so relaxing it reminded me of a spa. In all seriousness, there were things that I needed to finalize on how I was going to do this. There were benefits and drawbacks from doing it in certain ways, and I needed to read up on everything I could. During these last few weeks, my mind has only prioritized what came next. If going through body refinement wasn't immediately pressing, my mind dismissed it to focus on later. There were too many things to juggle if I tried to focus on everything all at once. My juggling act had decreased significantly the past week, opening up some room to focus on new things. There was no looming threat of the mindbreaker to worry about, no spirit anchor to form, and no law to upgrade. All the more labor-intensive tasks had been dealt with, leaving only the excruciatingly painful one that somehow managed to end up last on my to-do list. With the bodies cleaned up and thrown out of the camp, my trip down south began. Abigail and Austin would remain at Tracy's camp without needing to rush up here after I gave the ever-present birds the okay signal. There was no need for them to travel so far when I was fine. My luggage was bare bones. Only the armor I wore and my hammer would be coming with me. I usually harvested something from the boss of the wave to be used to fashion into gear, but I didn't this time. The demonic feeling they gave off was something I wanted nowhere near me, like with previous bosses. Sam and Ashley managed to turn the Vine Bear boss into a wonderful set of pauldrons that now rested on my shoulders. Its skull and upper jaw decorating my left shoulder with one of its paws on my right. They managed to strip the fur of its nature affinity and greatly strengthen the hide with their skills. While using a creature that already had an ice affinity as the base would have been better, none of those running around were as strong as the boss. While their levels may be similar, they were significantly different in terms of strength. The vine bear hide was still the best in terms of durability for me to use even without an ice affinity. It only took a small nudge with ice manipulation, to get frost armor, to freeze over the hide. Even less of a nudge after ice manipulation, upgraded to uncommon. It added to the overall bulkiness of my armor, but the extra defense was worth it. Heavy armor proficiency diminished the worst of the problems. When that skill reached journeyman, it would get even better. Speaking of armor, that was another thing I needed to add to my list. While preparing for body refining, my profession would become my sole focus for a time. It now sat 15 levels behind my class, and I aimed to fix that. I wasn't sure if there was a benefit to evolving both at the same time, but the gap bugged me. I would find out soon anyway. The way the store worked was aggravating to no end, but it was a wealth of knowledge when it wanted to be. The only thing you had to do was figure it out on your own first. Austin didn't care much to evolve both his class and profession at the same time, which was why he already went through with it. Jonathan, on the other hand, wanted to find out. After merging with Tracy, the information we had available to us exploded in variety. We had spent a lot of points for information on laws, humanity's racial trait, what the planet would be like, and others like it. Tracy focused more on profession techniques and skills while only having shallow information on everything else. She still had missives on law, enlightenment, and body refinement, but that wasn't the focus of her spending. She needed to know how best to utilize her workforce to produce the best armor and gear they could, or whatever other professions the people inside her camp held. She needed everybody to do the most they could to increase the camp's ability to defend the waves. They also needed skills to use to help during the waves rather than waiting to get skills from their class. The areas we focused on were different, and sharing what we knew allowed us to find out far more. Also, the increased number of people to add their thoughts to the conversation led to some interesting theory crafting. Not all of it led to something productive, but some things were worth testing. One of those things was whether a perfect evolution existed. I wasn't sure who came up with the idea, but they said it may be possible to get a bonus if you evolved both at the same time. It didn't make sense to me why professions and classes were separate. Why would there be a bonus for evolving them together? It was easy enough to test, though. Jonathan was the closest to doing so and was willing to wait for the opportunity. His profession was maxed out already, and he was only waiting on a few more levels from his class. If we hadn't merged with Tracy, he would have been capped at level 50 already. The fight with the Mindbreaker was his only major source of experience after moving down south. There wasn't a need for him to stand front and center in front of the walls anymore, which resulted in fewer levels from the waves. He would get there soon, though, and we would confirm if the idea was true or not. If it was, there was one more thing to add to the list below: making new armor. After evolving heavy armor proficiency to the apprentice tier, or uncommon in terms of other skills, my armor needed an upgrade. With its upgrading, it gave me the ability to increase the armor's proportions without suffering the drawback that said proportions usually entailed. The skill worked to ease the burden and cumbersome nature of the armor to a greater degree, letting me pack more of it on. There were two ways the skill could be used in my eyes. One of the ways was to wear what would commonly be considered heavy armor, but with the boosts from the proficiency skill, the body would still be able to move like it were medium or light armor. That way, warriors who focused more on mobility and agility would be able to keep the tankiness of heavy armor without dealing with its usual cumbersomeness. The armor would stay the same in terms of heaviness and protection, and the boost to mobility would only increase as the skill increased in rarity. That was not how I used the skill. The other way was to keep the boost the same while constantly increasing the heaviness and protection of the armor. So from beginner to expert, my mobility in the armor would stay the same, but the armor itself would change, becoming thicker and heavier to take advantage of the decrease in burden. I was already accustomed to the weight of heavy armor, and I didn't rely on my agility during battle. It was my strength and fortitude that I relied on, and wearing ever-increasing armor was a greater boon than being able to move more fluidly. My strength was enough to power through the restrictiveness of the armor. I wouldn't be doing any dance recitals or acrobatics, but I could probably shrug off a cannonball at this point. While having to always upgrade and buy new armor sounded annoying, that was where being able to make it came in. I wouldn't have to worry about the costs and effort to find a blacksmith able to do it if I relied on myself. Vinny could no doubt make it, but this was something I wanted to do myself. Also, he was focused on other things. With the increase of people buying their wares, profession experts were in high demand at Tracy's camps. No one had the points to buy better gear from the store and had to rely on blacksmiths and leatherworkers for their weapons and armor. Additionally, no one had the points to pay for said service, but that was where good old human ingenuity came into play. We went back to the beginning of commerce and the bartering system came back. For profession-focused people to increase in strength, they needed to make things aligning with their profession. To make things, they needed resources. They didn't have the class levels or skills to go out and acquire said resources and relied on others to do that. Hunters and warriors would go get the skins, bones, plants, etc. required and trade that to crafters for the finished product. That way, warriors could get gear without spending points and crafters could level up without having to buy or get the resources themselves. Some things still needed to be bought since they weren't readily available in the surroundings, but that was up to Tracy's discretion. She would only spend the points if she believed it was worth it. Jonathan and my family had been making a killing exploiting that. They had the points to spend while others didn't. They were able to buy things that weren't available for points and turn them into mountains of resources that were available, like hides, fangs, claws, plants, wood, and such. Uncle Braden and Scott had all the best building materials for whatever they wanted to build. Well, Braden did. Scott wouldn't be making much of anything anymore. Chapter 112 Boreas. It was nice to spend some time with my family again. There wasn't anything I had to run around for and cram in training for anymore. There wasn't a looming threat that needed to be dealt with. All that was left was the monsters in the waves, and I was used to those by now. It was also nice to give my hammer a rest. Well, give my warhammer a rest, my blacksmithing hammer was just getting started. That hammer had been singing loud and clear for the past few hours for the first time in a while. Vinny was across from me in the forge doing the same as me, pounding on a weapon of his own, adding his hammer clang to mine. To get back in the swing of things, I went back to traditional forging without any of the additions I had made to the process. A way to ease myself back into it without jumping into the deep end. After some warm-up, my forging style came out to play and I was able to really get back into the mindset. I had already managed to snag a level already. It was nice to see the numbers go up after stagnating for so long. It was relaxing to turn towards creation rather than the destruction that I had been forced into. Forced was a strong word, but it was nice nonetheless. Fighting was fun and all and got my blood pumping, but too much of anything wore on the soul. Especially something as bloody as what I had been doing. My foes being bloodthirsty monsters took the edge off of the carnage, but it was still carnage. While in the middle of shaping the metal into a sword, Abigail waltzed into the forge and walked up to me. Taking the time to finish with the piece while splitting my attention, I looked up curiously. We are still working on reducing the time needed, but we already managed to have the required time from a week to half that. But it still isn't enough to complete the procedure before the wave, she said. Is there no way to reduce it further? I asked. Not that we know of. There's a degree of control that we need to keep over the process to make sure it is successful, and going any faster could lead to unfortunate outcomes. Hearing that gave me a smidge of hope. The look on Abigail's face signified she knew what I was thinking of and disapproved. Theoretically, I started. If we were to speed up the process significantly, what is the worst that could happen? Death, she said curtly. What kind of death? A do not pass go kind or a more I'll just feel like death. My attempt at a joke did not go over well. Her face got even colder. I mean death. Like I'll have to bury another person I love kind of death. Her eyes bored into mine for a moment. The level of bodily destruction isn't a joking matter. Chris, this is serious. It's not something we can rush. Yes, but there were examples that we read that didn't take that long. There was one that only lasted a day. Why can't we do something like that? I asked. After getting back, I spent a ludicrous amount of points on all the information I could on body refinement. Honestly, I spent way more points than I should have, but it wasn't like I needed them for something else. I had well over 1,000,000 of the things, and buying as many missives as I did barely dented my total. All kinds of things were available for purchase. Personal accounts of what it felt like, studies on what each process did to the body, different ways to influence the results, ways to mitigate the chance of death. All kinds of things had been studied on the concept, and the most important was the list of elements used. Poison wasn't the only thing that could refine a body of wood. Any element could be used. Fire, lightning, earth, metal. There were techniques available for almost every known element. It was a lot of reading material to get through, but I did my best. Some of the authors took an almost clinical approach to the subject, which made reading the information drier than some of my engineering textbooks from college. It was all helpful, though, and information that I needed to get through. Picking the technique I was going to use was important to how it would affect me. Mitchell was a bit miffed that he didn't get a chance to pick an element and was stuck with poison after finding out there was such a wide variety. Gaining a body of wood through poison made one immune to most mundane poisons, greatly increasing your natural resistance to them. If one continued using poison for every subsequent body refinement, the body would eventually become resistant to even the most potent of them, becoming basically immune to most, if not all, poisons and venoms in the multiverse. While each gave different benefits, they also came with a drawback. It increased your affinity for the element. While that may sound like a good thing, one had to consider that raising an affinity was more than just increasing your proficiency with the element. It was deeper than that and affected you on a baser level. It bled into your spirit and would influence the skills and classes offered. It wouldn't affect personality or anything like that unless you chose demonic or something similar, but it wasn't always a good thing. It made it harder to increase the affinity of the opposing element. Increasing a fire affinity would make increasing an ice affinity in the future far harder. There were pros and cons to each element, and it took me a while to come to the decision of which I wanted to use. I threw fire out almost instantly. 1. I didn't really need a resistance to fire. Ice was the natural opposite, and my powers were already suited to making flames harder to use. 2. I didn't really want a fire affinity. It would clash with everything I had built so far. I had an ice affinity already, and most of my skills were ice-related along with my bloodline. Fire would be both unnecessary and somewhat harmful to use. Poison, venom, and acid were also thrown out. I didn't want to use those for similar reasons. I didn't feel like I needed the resistance to them I would gain, and similarly didn't want to increase my affinity with them. They didn't carry the harmful effects that fire would, but it was a waste to use the chance to boost an affinity for something I wouldn't use. Now, dismissing the resistance to the poisons wasn't done without thought. They gave a much-needed resistance, but I felt there were ways to achieve the same with the powers I already had. Poison and venom worked by spreading around the body through the bloodstream. It would become difficult to do that if it was frozen. I wasn't sure if that was a possibility I would be able to do in the future, but at the very least I should be able to freeze the invading poison, making it not as effective. Maybe an upgrade to frozen patchwork would make it so it froze any harmful effects that were trying to influence my body or something. The details still eluded me, but the fact that it was possible without relying on using poison for body refining made me dismiss them as options. Other possibilities got the axe for one reason or another until I only had a few left to choose from. One that people were surprised I didn't jump at the chance for was ice. Ice didn't even make the final list. I felt that my affinity with the element was already strong, and it would be more beneficial to pick something else. I likewise didn't need the resistance that it would instill. I was already resistant to it. It was my own damn element. It would be embarrassing if I could get damaged by my own power. What I focused on were things that would complement the strength I already had. Something that would mesh well with my already established ice. There were few real options, and one I briefly considered was lightning. Thundersnow was a thing that existed before, and if I managed to get some movement skills utilizing lightning, my speed would skyrocket. As much fun as shooting lightning bolts would be, there was only one element that was the clear choice. It was something I had already been trying to add to my repertoire. Ice wasn't the sole element that made the Arctic so desolate. It wasn't alone when winter transformed the area into its harsh environment. While it was the main element, it wasn't the sole element. I could replicate the effects slightly with the skills I already had, but there was one big thing I was missing. My skills didn't have the impact that nature did. Sure, I could bring the temperature to below zero and turn the area into a winter wonderland, but there was still something missing to make it complete. A certain je ne sais quoi. Ice wasn't what heralded the start of winter. That was left to something else. The northern winds. Wind was the natural choice. Wind would boost my powers better than anything else, and it would be the best for me right now. Already I tried to incorporate wind into my skill set. It was something I wanted to use to upgrade hail. See. Maybe add a devastating wind chill to the area while I fought. Ideas were easy to come by for what I could do with wind. I hadn't given it a lot of time, but I had attempted to try and gain a wind law. None of what I tried had borne fruit, but that didn't mean I didn't attempt it. The increase in wind affinity would make gaining a wind law a lot easier. With my method chosen, constructing what I was going to use was the next step. Body refining using wind needed hurricane-style winds to shred the body over and over again, grinding it down with gale-force winds. I needed an environment that would create a localized typhoon with whipping winds constantly, and the only way to do that was to make it. There wasn't a place that I knew with natural winds like that, so I turned to artificial means. The runes were expensive to buy, and it would take a long time to build, but it was possible. I had already started planning it. There were a few hiccups in the plan, but those weren't hard to overcome. The healers needed to be close enough to use their skills while staying out of the area of effect. The runes needed to stay running for an indefinite amount of time until the process was over. Other small things came up, but it wasn't anything Vinny and I couldn't come up with a solution for. Trying to do it all on my own would take longer than I wanted, and Vinny was happy to help. Runes weren't his expertise, but he could help construct the room. Braden likewise had a hand in the planning. Something this complicated wasn't something I could make on my own right now, and had to fall back on buying some of the pieces from the store. Certain formations were too complicated and were easier to buy than spending time trying to figure out how to make them. One of the last things that needed to be finalized was how long it was going to take. Mitchell's procedure ended up taking just under a week to complete, and that wasn't something I could do. The longest I could go was 3 days. Something right after the 29th wave, but done in time for the final one. Abigail worked with all of the other healers trying to come up with a safe method to decrease the duration, but they hadn't managed to shorten it to under 3 days yet. Well, they could, but not with the level of safety they wanted. Shortening the time increased the strain on the body and the chance of death. It turned what could be a 90 to 95% survival rate into something more like 40 to 50%, and sometimes lower than that depending on how fast the process was. The faster the refinement, the higher the chance of death, generally. They had 2 days to figure it out. I would be going through with it with or without their approval. It wasn't that I didn't care about the survival rate, but I wanted to evolve before returning to Earth, and that was the last thing standing in my way. Chapter 113 Formations. With my plan to finish the last task on my to-do list finalized, the only thing I had to do was make the apparatus. And by make, I meant learn how to make, which involved learning formations from the ground up. Uncle Topher, why are you getting mad at books? Anna's high-pitched voice sounded out from behind me. I'm not getting mad at books, Anna. The grinding of teeth and my forced tone betrayed that sentiment. It looks like you are. She so helpfully corrected. To make the room that would help refine my body, I first needed to learn more about enchanting. I knew the basics, and that was bare bones at best. My idea of enchanting was carving a single rune on a thing and calling it done. It was amateur and dreadfully uninspired. During my study, it said that was one of the first ways of enchantment discovered, while also being the most basic. Being told that I spent days learning to carve runes and put them on equipment was the most basic hadn't been an ego booster. With some free time or time not spent fighting, I was working to fix my deficit of knowledge with as many books as I could buy, which was a lot. I had a veritable library surrounding me with piles of books stacked in my lodge. Even though I wasn't living with them, Austin was kind enough to give me his to use for the moment. While I told Anna I wasn't mad at books, that wasn't entirely true. While I wasn't mad at the books themselves, I was certainly mad at the authors of said books. Reading them made me feel like they all got together to hold a competition for who could be the most convoluted and confusing while still getting the information across. It was a nightmare. The only reason I hadn't given up in frustration was because I was actually learning things, albeit slowly. "What is it you need, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration out of my tone and prove her right. "Uncle Braden wanted me to tell you that it should work, but he's still testing materials," she said while staring up at the ceiling, making sure she remembered it right. "Thank you. Tell him I should be able to give him an answer soon," I said back. She didn't stick around after that and ran off elsewhere, presumably to deliver my answer, but probably stopping somewhere else along the way. Braden was in charge of most of the construction along with Vinny, while I was in charge of the runes. They needed to build something strong enough to contain the force of the winds while also keeping it enchantable. Some materials weren't able to hold enchantments very well, while others just made doing so harder. Braden had been hounding me, trying to figure out how forceful the winds were going to be, needing to know the details of what was required. We had estimates from body refinement techniques we bought, but nothing definitive as of yet, which was what I was trying to figure out. Our first attempt at body refining was to pump someone full of poison while layering multiple healing spells over them to help with the process. The poison would break down the body while their vitality would work to put it back together. The healing spells helped keep the body from dying. With the wealth of books I bought, we learned there were actual techniques people had written to make the process more uniform. Not quite a step-by-step process, but less free-form. Body refining techniques were something a person could use to guide the process along, both speeding it up and changing the desired effect on the outcome. By free-form, I referred to what we did, just pumping someone full of poison and hoping for the best. Techniques would have the person try and direct the poison around the body in a certain order while also staying conscious. If the person fell unconscious, then they weren't able to direct the process anymore, diminishing the effect. Different techniques had different outcomes. Some were better than others, but that was mostly subjective. Taking poison body refinement techniques, for example, they varied in the order, intensity, and nature of the poison and method of application. Intravenous injection, absorbed through the skin, inhaled, ingested, all the different ways poison could enter the body changed the outcomes slightly. The outcomes changed based on which was used, and they could sometimes end up drastically different. One poison technique would make the body turn poisons into medicine, making it so eating them would have a beneficial effect on the body. One made them get stored in the body to be released later. One made a person able to excrete poison from certain parts of their body. It was more than just becoming immune. Learning the different possibilities was kind of mind-blowing. While not every effect was possible at the body of wood stage, they built up to it for later tiers, adding on to previous techniques used, building on what was already there. Wood was the most basic stage and was commonly known as building the foundation. In almost every book, body of wood was used to increase the body's resistance to the selected element so more extreme procedures could be done later down the line. We also learned that healing spells only prolonged the process. Getting healed from an outside source ruined the effect of the body refining and made the whole thing take longer. The body needed to heal on its own while also being inundated with the energy used to destroy it. It would build up a tolerance and would then use that energy while healing to do that. The process would break down the body with foreign energy, be it wind, poison, or whatnot, and the body would repair itself as best it could. After the first round of destruction, a trace amount of the energy could be found in the repaired cells. That trace amount would increase in intensity until the threshold for body of wood was met. While that was a gross generalization of the process, it was the gist. Healing spells would subvert the healing process, and the cells wouldn't get a chance to absorb the needed trace energy, leading to them needing to be broken down again. Healing spells made the whole thing safer and kept the body from shutting down, but it prolonged the suffering. One of the books even used it as a method of torture, pumping the body so full of healing that the process would never be complete. That had been a cheery read. Back to my books, though. Runes and formations were both highly technical and complicated subjects. Runes, the language of power, and formations, stringing runes together to have a desired effect, were some of the most complicated areas of study in the multiverse. These complications came from both breadth and depth. The sheer variety of uses led to the need to have extensive knowledge on the subject, while the depth only exacerbated the issue. When I first learned what formations were, I confused it with wards. Wards were a string of runes combined together to have a desired effect. Why did there need to be another word for it? Turns out, wards were a specific subsection of formations. So not only did I use the most basic form of creating wards by using a singular giant rune, I created the most basic form of a subsection of a much bigger area of enchanting. When I first asked one of the merchants in Tracy's camp to buy all the runic enchanting information he could from the store, he looked at me funny. I had to repeat that I wanted all of the information in the store before he understood. He stopped looking at me funny when I dropped a load of wealth on him. Jonathan was maxed through his profession, so I tried to spread the love around. We didn't have any other merchants in our camp, well, merchants that survived, and I wanted to be nice if I could. No point in letting the experience go to waste. Plus, I didn't feel like searching through the store myself. Sorting the veritable sea of things I could buy sounded like a headache that I wanted to avoid. I didn't particularly care much about the other people in the camp, but it wasn't that hard to seek the man out. Whether it was a mixture of fear or my intimidating figure, the man didn't ask a lot of questions. I asked for all the runic enchanting books in the store, and he took me at my word for it. The mountain of books that spawned left me speechless. There were at least 100 of the things, and they weren't skinny either. It was also a lot more expensive than anticipated. I essentially dropped a wad of cash on the man to get him moving. I didn't expect him to use it all and assumed I would end up getting some of it back. That wasn't the case. What I got back was chump change. Luckily, I was able to ignore most of the books for now since they were on a different subject than what I needed, but there was still a lot left about formations. Those were the ones that I was going through now. Talismans, runic equipment, making runic consumables, and all the other subjects could be learned later. Formations were already complicated enough. Runes put in a certain order had certain outcomes. Providing a different quantity of mana had different effects. Quality, purity, affinity, type of connection. Everything had an effect and needed to be taken into account when creating the formation. Given that different types of connections were something I didn't know existed, there was a lot to learn. That didn't even mention the different processes that could be done to change the formation. Merging and splitting power, changing its affinity, altering its flow. My brain hurt thinking about it. But if engineering school taught me anything, it was to cram for exams, and this was similar. In college, to pass an exam, you didn't need to know every minute detail about a subject. While that would help, it wasn't necessary. As long as you knew enough to get by, it would be fine. It was an art I had mastered after 4 years of the place. The method I used was working backward with the endpoint in mind. There were only certain types of questions that would be asked, and as long as I knew how to do those, then I would pass. There was no need to learn everything. I didn't need to know all of the exceptions, the outliers that didn't follow the rule. As long as I knew the rough process, it didn't matter. Brushing up on the common tricks professors might throw was left till after I knew what I was doing. I channeled that method into what I was doing now. I didn't need to know what all the different connections did, what a rune did if it was placed before or after another. I knew what it needed to do at the end, and worked backward from there. For gale force winds, I needed a combination of wind runes and force runes strung together to give direction and shape. The strength of the wind could be determined by the amount and quality of mana used to power it rather than trying to figure it out runically. There were ways to limit the strength of the formation, but that was an extra step to learn I didn't need. I equated them to pressure regulators. Specific ways to make sure the mana quantity moving through the rune was how it was intended. While my way would lead to a more complicated activation and could lead to more things going wrong, it was faster for me to learn how to make it. I would be keeping that fact to myself. Abigail didn't need to know that I was putting this together with magical duct tape and a prayer. I had to buy a lot of runes for the process, but my value for points plummeted after getting my bloodline. I wasn't sure if I would lose them in a few days, so it was better to spend them now while I could. I had 2 days to figure this whole thing out, and by golly, I would do it. Knowing the amount of profession levels I would get from this wasn't even my biggest motivator. Chapter 114 Stone Turtle. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Another one. Building, testing, tweaking, changing, and recarving all work to give experience, and it wasn't small either. The grade and cost of the materials I was working with accelerated the level gain significantly. It was one of the main reasons my profession was so high level to begin with. I had no hope of catching up to Vinny or Braden, or any other crafter-focused person, but I was gaining on them somewhat. Both men in question already had their E-rank evolution, not desiring to wait on Jonathan to figure out if it was worth it. Vinny became an even better blacksmith and Braden did the same but with building. They made things constantly, raking in levels faster than I could hope to imagine. Just the time they spent working wasn't something I could match. Before, when Vinny and I just started leveling up as blacksmiths, we kept a similar pace. Both leveling up at roughly the same time. That didn't last long. When I went to go hunt, Vinny would stay in the forge. When I trained my skills, Vinny was in the forge. When I meditated trying to improve my law, you guessed it, he was in the forge. Our level discrepancy only grew. I fell behind a level, then 2, then 5, then 10. Now, he was somewhere in the mid-50s while I lamented in the high 30s, reaching 38 with the most recent notification chime. Usually, it would take longer for a person to climb in levels than this, but I had a few things going for me that were helping the process. The experience gained on crafts was dependent on the final grade along with the difficulty of crafting it. A master smith forging a piddling sword wouldn't get the same experience as an apprentice smith trying their best to make the same piddling sword. I could make commandeer equipment if I wanted to, but my focus was more on runes for the time being. They allowed me to take Vinny's finished work and add on to it for more experience in less time. Well, it averaged out to the same amount of time if the failures were taken into consideration. Getting no experience from failing was a blow when I started but became increasingly less relevant. My carving skills got better with each attempt and my failure went down to show that. Another reason that I was gaining profession levels faster than normal was the materials I used. Both rarer and more expensive, they increased the experience I gained per craft. They worked to increase the difficulty. Using stronger materials was harder to forge than mundane steel, and they added to the final grade. Using better base materials increased the base rank of the final piece before I even took a hammer to it. The last thing aiding my level climb was the first-time bonus. We weren't sure how it worked or the specifics of it yet, but there was a chunk of experience earned when doing something for the first time. I learned that best when I gained 3 levels on the Frost ward back at camp. Frost rune I had to correct. Wishful thinking wasn't enough to call it a ward. The first-time bonus was what I attributed my recent level gain to and what has netted me the quickest levels so far. My current project was a host of new things all topped with the hardest difficulty I could manage. The only thing it was missing was expensive materials. Trying to cobble together a working formation with runes I both barely understood and processes I was largely guessing at. I couldn't think of anything more difficult. If I had to equate the process to something, I would say it was like trying to code by copy-pasting someone else's with only a basic understanding of the language used. Not the programming language written in the actual language. The only reason I knew what any of it meant was because of basic runecrafting. The skill helped in deciphering what each rune represented and gave a glimpse at the greater meaning each rune held. It wasn't perfect nor was it thorough, but it was better than nothing. Some of the runes I had to test myself to find out what they did, and those scarcely went according to plan. Carving them into sheets of metal before powering them up with mana resulted in some exploding and others doing nothing. Immense confusion and frustration accompanied the majority. There was one I was certain was the rune responsible for producing wind, but after powering it up to no effect, my conjecture was proven incorrect. Some grumbling and rereading of the books had me trying to figure it out for nearly an hour until I did. Boy, did what I found out piss me off. The rune was responsible for producing wind, but it wouldn't do it on its own. It needed a secondary rune to give it direction before it would do so. Powering it up by itself did nothing, which I had mistakenly thought was an error on my part. While going through and trying my best to combine runes together, it was hard to keep the ideas of other things out of my head. Rune combinations I could use in my hammer. The string of runes I could use on Jonathan's shields. What I would engrave on Rachel's and Abigail's staves. For a brief moment, I came up with plans for a shield and axe set similar to what I started with. That one jerked my focus back to the formation box and away from my wondering ideas. Congratulations! You have leveled up. The days weren't getting any shorter and my level of understanding wasn't where I needed it to be. Yes, I'm here. What was so important? I grumbled. It had been a sleepless night trying to put everything together, and it was hard to keep my irritation at bay. It was barely sunrise when Abigail came to get me for something she said was something I needed to be there for. I could have been obstinate and refused but decided to go along with it. It wasn't like I didn't need a break and to let my mind rest for a few moments anyway. After exiting my lodge, or Austin's lodge if you wanted to be specific, Abigail led me to a gathering of people. Most everyone remaining from my family was there, with Jonathan, Austin, Vinny, and Braden featured front and center. My tired mind struggled to come up with why they were gathered separately. The only thing that they all had in common was they were the only ear-ranks, or in Jonathan's case, near ear-rank. Now, with everyone here, we can begin, Abigail announced. I think we should start with you telling us what this is about, I said. John managed to reach level 50 in his class the other day and is ready to evolve to ear-rank. She answered. Oh, I hadn't realized he was so close. Now the grouping made more sense. Some items were brought out and a circle was made around the man in question. Now, evolving to ear-rank is different than before. It isn't just picking a new class or profession. Austin said to the nods of the other evolved members. During the process, you need to focus on the changes you want to make and choose the path you wish to take. It's generally straightforward, but we can give you some tips and tell you how ours went. It's different for every person, at least that's what we think so far. Braden said. Mine was like building a house. There were materials there I could use to change the house I was building and alter it in some way. Different techniques and processes I could use to change the finished product. It didn't explicitly come out and say it, but it was clear which was temporary and permanent. Everyone who had evolved so far had picked the temporary option during their evolution and chosen to focus on their bloodline powers rather than changing their body. Them having bloodlines was an initial shock to me but made sense looking back. They wanted to evolve, but that evolution was wasted without a bloodline. Jonathan had a large amount of points from fighting and had boosted his wealth through hunting. Like me and Austin, he sought out the fallen pylons to earn more points. Most of the fighters did the same. Rachel, Hal, and Carrie the most. They weren't as fast or efficient as us, but they managed to accrue a large amount of points. Vinny and Braden didn't have that option. They could still fight, but they didn't actively search monsters out for their points. The family did something different for them. The family as a whole got a large amount of points every wave. When pooled together, it was enough for a decent bloodline. I alone donated over 500,000 to both of them for that purpose, and Austin did more than that. He didn't have to think of future purchases or materials for his craft. His bloodline and genetic material for his evolution were both already purchased. He also didn't have any need for the points he earned. His explorer profession didn't require metals, wood, herbs, and the like. There wasn't a drain on his income that he needed to save up for. We were all under the use it or lose it mentality regarding our points, which made it easier for him to give them away. If I didn't still have things I needed to buy, I would have done the same. All of it added together for better than average bloodlines for the both of them, and with the end of the tutorial near, the same was planned for the rest of the family. With only 17 of us left, there weren't that many we needed to buy. 5 of us already had them, leaving only 12 that still needed them. Finding out that they already had them was kind of a bummer. It solidified the fact that I had been away. When the tutorial first started, the constant contact from living with my entire family was grating. Going from living on my own to back with not only my immediate family, but my entire family needed some getting used to. But after getting used to living with them and knowing everything, it was almost sad to find out after the fact. When I donated the points, I didn't give it to them specifically. I gave it to Abigail to use as she saw fit. It wasn't like I needed to know every little detail about them, but something like this was a milestone I felt miffed to have missed. Especially after so many of us weren't here for them. Mine was like forging a weapon. Vinny went on to detail his, which was similar to Braden's, but instead of making a house, he made a sword. Austin's was the most different, but it held true to what the others had already said. The only thing that all of them had in common was that there was only so much that they could change. They felt the limit of how far they could push it, which signified the amount their body could take. For E rank, it was notoriously little. "All right, I'm ready," Jonathan said after listening to the other three. His bloodline was up there in costs, and so were the materials he needed. He chose the stone turtle as his bloodline, and it was up there in rank. Better than the dirt turtle and sand tortoise, but not on the same level as what Austin and I had. It boosted his fortitude and endurance and defensive earth skills tremendously, but lacked the offensive power that mine and Austin's did. He didn't see that as an issue, though. It wasn't what his class and skills were geared for. The materials around him mirrored that. Multiple shells of stone turtles, the most expensive part, along with blood essence. He was doubling down on the defensive capabilities. He sat down surrounded by the materials and started to glow, the process beginning. He would be the fourth of our group to hit E rank. Chapter 115, Less Than Honorable. Jonathan's evolution carried with it a shocking revelation. Evolving both class and profession simultaneously did come with a bonus to the process. If it hadn't been so cliché, I might have been surprised. This seemed on brand for what we had learned so far and wasn't beyond the realm of possibility. After finding out it was true, it wasn't hard to come up with a reason why. From everything we have learned about this new system that watched everything we did, it all revolved around effort expended. The system didn't do anything for free. It helped with leveling by taking a cut of the essence. The same held true for evolving. To keep that assistance, you had to prove you were worthy of it. For every bit of aid you received, there was a cost that came with it. I wasn't sure if it was a net even for the system, or if it came out ahead, but it wasn't hard to come up with reasons for why there was a bonus. During evolutions, the system expended effort to help you through the process, whether class or profession, it didn't matter, but it aided you through it. Doing both at the same time probably saved the system either energy or power of some sort, making the process cost less than doing them both separately. Since that seemed to be the case, both evolutions cost the system less to help with. The bonus, on the other hand, could be for one of two reasons. One, the system wanted to incentivize evolving both at the same time, hence the bonus. Or two, the leftover energy the system would have had to expend stayed with you, rather than being used as payment. Finding out there was a bonus was all well and good, except it took a while to find out what the bonus actually was. It wasn't explicitly stated anywhere, and it took us a minute to figure it out. There were two things different between the evolution to E rank when evolving separately compared to at the same time. The stat boost during the evolution and the racial boost. Every time a person went up in rank, there was an associated stat boost to all stats. For H to G, it was 2 stat points. From G to F, it was 5 stat points. What took so long was because that wasn't the set-in-stone rule we had assumed it had been. When I evolved to G rank, 2 stat points in every attribute was my reward. We were still new to ranking up and all that, so when we told each other, everyone confirmed they received 2. Thinking that it was all standardized, when we evolved to F rank, we didn't think to say anything about it. When I evolved to F rank, I got 5 points in every stat, the same as Austin, who I had mentioned it to at one point or another. After his confirmation, I didn't think anything of it. Except now, in our questioning of what was different, Braden and Vinny got a different boost than Austin when evolving to E rank, even though we all assumed it was the same. With some backtracking, we found out the reason. The rarity of the class or profession you were evolving into mattered. Depending on the rarity, the boost for the racial rank up changed. We all got 2 at the start because there wasn't that much of a difference between rarities at that level. One got 8 stat points per level and the other got 10. For the 15 levels in G rank, that was only a 30-point difference. A difference that could easily be made up in other ways, like training. The F rank evolution was where differences started to show. Austin and I both got 5 points in every stat, while Rachel, Jonathan, Vinny, and Braden all got 4, while everyone else got 3. It happened again at E rank. Austin got 10 while Vinny and Braden only got 9. The only common denominator between everything was the rarity we all evolved into. Austin and I evolved with rare classes for F rank, and Austin kept that going into E rank. Vinny and Braden both had uncommon professions for theirs, making it clear what was happening after that. How we noticed the discrepancy was because Jonathan got a different number than either of them. Jonathan, with a law and spirit anchor, evolved with a rare class matching Austin. Being the same rarity as Austin, he should have gotten 10 stat points, but he got 13. Everyone was wondering about the difference, and it took until Abigail wrote it all down that we found out the math behind it. The stat boost when ranking up your race was 20% of the stats per level of the class you were evolving into. There was some rounding that happened, but that was generally the case. When I evolved into the class I have now, Champion of Nibelheim, it gave 24 stats per level, resulting in a 5-point boost to all stats. Jonathan, evolving into an uncommon class for F rank, got 20 stat points per level and only received a 4-point boost to all stats. The same held true for the common rarity as well. The difference this time was instead of the boost being 20%, it was 25%. Only getting a 5% boost for evolving both at the same time didn't seem like that much, but you also had to consider we were still in the lower ranks. Compared to the stat points that would be bouncing around up in A or S rank, the small amount we got per level wasn't that much. Altogether, Jonathan, getting 13 points in all the 9 different attributes, received 117 stat points for his evolution while Austin only got 90. 27 free stat points for evolving both at the same time didn't sound too bad when you thought about it like that. Plus, we learned that when doing both at the same time, the higher rarity class or profession was all that mattered. The boost was only from the higher one. Jonathan had a rare class and an uncommon profession, but he got the stat points of his higher one. And that wasn't even the only bonus. Jonathan got to boost his bloodline more than the other 3 had been able to. That one was a bit less definitive since we were unable to get hard numbers, but we were confident that was the case. From what we had read, he should have only been able to use 2 stone turtle shells as material but managed to use 3 instead. We were lucky we bought extra thinking that could have been a possibility. All of it added up to be a decent-sized boost for evolving both at the same time rather than doing them separately. With all the excitement and brainstorming that the crowd turned into, I was ready to get back to what I was doing. I still needed to finish making what I was dubbing the wind chamber. It didn't sound that impressive, but I didn't really care about that. It beat calling it the room forever. Before I managed to sneak off back to my books, Austin stopped me outside of his lodge. "Can we talk before you bury your head in books again?" he asked. "Sure, but make it quick. I'm kind of on a time crunch with this," I answered. With the end of the tutorial coming up, people have been speculating. Have you heard what they are saying? The way he said speculating clued me in on what he was referring to. People spoke in hushed whispers about it, hoping that talking about it quietly wouldn't jinx it. "Are you talking about how the final wave will come on day 88, but we won't leave until day 90? I asked without the usual deference. It would happen or it wouldn't. Talking about it in a whisper didn't change that. "Yes," he nodded. "Only an idiot didn't do the math. The tutorial lasted 90 days with a wave coming every 3 days starting on the 1st. Marking all the waves out starting on the 1st made the final wave come on day 88, not day 90. There would be 2 more days of the tutorial after all the waves were over. We didn't know what they would be used for, but it seemed unlikely that another wave would come. The tutorial had held to its pattern almost religiously. It seemed reasonable to assume that it wouldn't break it right at the end. We didn't know what the last 2 days would be used for, but another wave was not the running theory. Plus, 30 seemed like too even a number to break with another last-minute wave. The last wave already had so many things going for it, symbolizing that it was the grande finale. I didn't think that there would be another. Some thought it was time to get everything in order before being transported back home. An opportunity to pack everything up and take what we needed while also giving time to farm that last bit of points before the store disappeared. The grace period to use what the tutorial offered before it disappeared. It didn't matter to me which was the case. I had my own plans for how I was going to spend the last few days. There were pylons out there that would look better conquered, if you catch my meaning. I planned to try to get the most out of the tutorial prizes by conquering as many pylons as possible in the 2-day span. We hadn't solidified any plans yet, but everyone in the family was on the same page. Austin and I were able to fight pylons by ourselves while Jonathan, Rachel, Hal, and Carrie would form a group to go around and do the same. We planned to get as many as we could. "From what I've heard, Tracy plans to do the same as us," he said. "So, what does it matter?" I scoffed. She isn't strong enough to get that many, and I doubt we will be able to get all 50 anyway. There were enough pylons to go around. What did the ones Tracy would conquer matter? What if that Kurt guy gets involved? Austin brought up the man in the south. Tracy was still negotiating with the man trying to merge, and it was looking likely to happen. I wasn't certain when, but if it happened, it would be soon. Most likely before the next wave. What are you suggesting? I questioned. He knew that the extra competition wasn't that big of a deal. We most likely wouldn't be able to get them all, so it was odd that he was bringing it up. What if we were to be more domineering about it? He threw out there. He didn't say the words specifically, but I understood what he was implying. That could be seen as betrayal. I gave my word that we wouldn't come into conflict with her. I said, less than honorable almost. Betrayal is a strong word. I would say more like inevitable. Plus, you said while the waves came, not for the entirety of the tutorial. We are stronger than her. We could easily let her conquer as many pylons as she wants and then subjugate them. He tried to butter up the words used, but it was clear to me. So not only are you suggesting we betray her, but wait until the last possible moment to drive the knife in her back? I wasn't angry or mad at the suggestion, just surprised. Surprised he had brought it up. Don't make it sound so bad. It isn't like we're killing her. Just liberating some of the rewards she may or may not receive. He said, wiggling his hand back and forth in a SOSO manner. Is this necessary? Must we go to such lengths for a reward we don't even know the value of? I sighed dejectedly. We are strong already. Isn't that enough? We have no idea what the world will be like when we get back. Might as well get everything out of this tutorial as we can. His voice was firmer now, more resolute. You know he wouldn't like this. My tone wasn't like Austin's. It didn't have the firmness his did, only resignation. Austin knew the he I was referring to. I know. I won't force you, but it is something you should think about. Saying this, he let me go back to my books. It was hard to focus on the words on the page after that conversation. Chapter 116, Stubborn Skill. Are you sure this is going to work, Chris? Austin questioned from beside me. We were both standing next to each other, admiring the pinnacle of my creation. A marvel of magic and engineering combined together flawlessly. The system couldn't have done better if it tried. As sure as I can be, I answered. I'm not questioning your masterpiece, but it doesn't look like it's going to work. Austin tried his best not to sound skeptical, but I could hear it in his tone. How could I not hear it when I was skeptical myself? Are you doubting me? I said with false seriousness. Certainly not. I'm just saying that this looks like a horribly thrown together shack that has magic lines running all over it that could be confused for a toddler who got too creative with a crayon. He said before adding, not to mention the mana stones sticking out of it at seemingly random places. Damn. Tell me how you really feel. Well, it may not look the best, or look good at all, or show any semblance of the bare minimum of certainty, but it will work. I can feel it. My words declined in confidence before rising back with my final statement. How likely do your feelings say this will end in an explosion? I could hear the air quotes the jackass was using. Oh, ye of little faith, my friend. You'll see. After the wave is over, it will work to perfection. I guarantee it. I announced, patting him on the back. Sure, Christopher, sure. Let's hope so. He mumbled. It had been a hectic finish, but I managed to complete the wind chamber with a few hours to spare. The sun was on its way up on day 85 and it would soon be noon. The 29th wave was almost here, and after fighting the beasties off, this marvelous creation and I had a date. No one who had laid eyes on it thought it was going to work. Not even Austin, who was usually the least critical of my family members. Abigail threw a fit when she saw it, saying there was no way in hell this was going to work. All of them could shove it. The experience I got from building it was enormous and pulled me to level 44, getting me another skill from my profession. Being a runic blacksmith, I felt I was a little light on the blacksmithing skills, but I could always get those later. There was still room in my spirit for a few bought blacksmithing skills, and skimping now wouldn't hurt. For my level 40 skill, I went similar to warding on, and went with formation mana flow, uncommon. There wasn't an overreaching formations skill, sadly, so I went for the next best thing. It didn't give intimate knowledge about formations or even a little knowledge, but what it did do helped a ton after getting it. It let me test out the mana flows inside a formation without having to turn it on. Like a test run of sorts to see where it went wrong. It was a great diagnostic skill to find the flaws in my patchwork formation and help fix them. Like a helpful debugger. I used the skill religiously as the final run-through before giving it the first test. Everything held up fine and looked to be stable enough to do what it needed to. If it would still function afterward was another story. At no point in the construction process did I consider longevity in the equation. It would last the few days it needed to, fingers crossed, but it wouldn't last much longer after that. Trying to make it reliable and something that would last was an extra complication I didn't need to worry myself with. All I needed it for was to refine my body. Could burst into flames afterward for all I cared. With my job done, and the wave encroaching, I made my trip back up north. Where the air was lighter and didn't smother you with humidity and the temperature didn't make you dread living. My preparations for the wave were non-existent. I didn't even feel a hint of worry about what was to come now that I had my anchor. It was like the monsters lost what made them threatening and turned into walking bags of experience. Well, if I could level, that was. I did wonder where all the experience was going. Essence, I supposed. Everything we read and learned called it essence instead of experience. It didn't matter what it was called. I had to wonder where it was going. Upon killing something, essence would flow from the deceased to the one who killed it and level them up. I knew I wasn't at my cap, or something like that, so my soul well wasn't full. Was it being banked for when I could use it again? Somehow I doubted that. My leading theory was that my body was at its limit for the essence it could hold. It needed to evolve up a rank for more essence to be applied to it. That theory had some holes in it, but it was the best I could come up with. The different rarities didn't make sense and training skewed things if I thought about it too hard. If I was at my limit, I shouldn't have been able to gain stats through training like I had. Now, it wasn't a lot, only 1 or 2 in a few stats. Particularly my low ones, but I still got a few. I wasn't as concerned about it as Abigail was. Controlling as she was, she needed to know how it all worked. It was killing her to not know how something like this worked. I held on to the belief that I would find out in time. It would eventually come up and I would know how it all worked. It wasn't something that I needed to concern myself with right now. That was my attitude about a lot of things, really. Growing up with Abigail instilled that in me. Gabriel too. He wasn't as bad as her, but there were certain subjects where he was unnaturally knowledgeable. Abigail would deep dive into things to figure it out, and she wasn't shy about sharing it. More like incessant with letting other people know. Some of that attitude had rubbed off on me, but it was far less pronounced. I only did that for things I really cared about. Mostly a few games that I liked. Diving deep into the mechanics of it and figuring out the best way to do something. I did not doubt that she would find out eventually, and I would know soon after. Anyway, that was a matter for a different time. A time when hundreds of monsters weren't charging at me. Describing the fight that transpired could be done in a few words. The monsters rushed in and they died. The monsters rushed in and they died quickly if you wished for the longer and more specific description. During the wave was one of the few times being level-capped frustrated me. Being max level wasn't that big of a deal when I had other things to focus on. My anchor last wave and my law before that. Now, though, there was nothing to strive toward during the wave to keep me occupied. Only how fast I could kill them was what filled my mind. It gave me time to experiment with skill usage, but nothing totally new came out of it. Only new uses for a few skills here and there. The main one I tried was the incessant thorn in my side. Sweeping slash. See? That skill had been the bane of my existence recently, and I just couldn't force it into submission. If it only worked on the weapon I was holding, then that was how I would use it. I changed my approach to the skill and created my snowflakes of death in my hand before giving them a mighty toss. The skill flowed into the snowflake and did something I didn't expect it to. 1, it took a lot more mana, and 2, it started shooting out mana blades from all sides. I had assumed it would pick one edge and run with it, creating a lopsided snowflake with one really long mana blade. That assumption was wrong. It turned the already sharp and spiky snowflake into an even bigger sharp and spiky circle of death, extending out mana blades in every which way, taking extra mana to go with it. I packed the skill full and then put a little extra in the ice before letting it fly. While testing, I only had one snowflake active, which made controlling it with ice manipulation a breeze. It flew through the air, spinning this way and that. The weak mana blades didn't have the strength needed to dismember the monsters, but they left cuts here and there. Small cuts, but they were still cuts. If I pumped my law into it, that would change. I didn't want to do that yet, though. I wanted to refine the technique a bit before I went that far. The reason for that was because of the feeling that it gave off. I felt if I pushed it with my law right now, it would have upgraded in rarity and maybe fixed some of the things wrong with it. I had the time to spare and I didn't want to muck this up. If it evolved with the same stringent requirements as it had now, I was going to throw it away. Upgrading it to uncommon had been enough of a headache as it was. I could have easily upgraded it earlier, but that wouldn't have fixed the things in the skill I needed to, probably only making the mana blade stronger or longer. A base upgrade like I had with Power Strike C. Pushing the skill to activate on something I wasn't touching was still out of the question, but making it last wasn't. My first attempt stalled out and ran out of mana not long after being thrown, and that was what I tried to fix. Ice manipulation on only one object made it easy to control every aspect of that one object. If I was trying to do this for 20 different snowflakes, it would have been impossible. The way I went about it came from the insight I gained recently. Just like formations, skills needed mana to activate. The way I was using it now took a bunch at activation, then chewed through it quickly after it left my hand. What I needed to do was build a reservoir of sorts inside the ice to store mana to keep the skill going. Every attempt at pumping mana into it from afar ended the same as trying to activate the skill from afar. It was a nice thought experiment and a test of the rudimentary skills I picked up from the project that I just completed. Creating what were essentially mana capacitors inside the ice to hold extra mana to keep the skill going was difficult at first, but with ice manipulation solely focused on the task, it didn't take long to finish what I needed it to. The runes to do so were still fresh in my mind from my creation and study. My rate of killing slowed, but that didn't bother me. Fixing this frustrating skill was more important to me right now. Fixing it the best I was able to, I pumped my law into both the skill and ice. Feeling that it wasn't enough, I channeled my spirit into it to add to the destructiveness with my new spirit anchor. The spinning snowflake arced out, carrying with it a bright glow of everything I had pushed into it. Wherever it went, blood flew, chopping deep gouges out of the monsters while occasionally cutting off limbs if the angle was right. Nothing could hold up to the combined powers filling the ice, and it carved through the bodies surrounding me in a wide sweep. It wouldn't have been possible without my law and spirit, but with it, the beasts couldn't hold up. The shape of the arc was deliberate, and it was flying in wide sweeps for a reason. A reason that came true when a chime sounded out. Finally, that infernal skill finally figured itself out. Chapter 117, Wind Chamber. Oh yes, this was exactly what I wanted. After the skill upgraded, the snow morphed and changed as I channeled mana into the new skill structure. From what I glimpsed already, the skill was vastly different than it once was, and I couldn't help but feel giddy at the upgrade. Something told me waiting to upgrade it was the right choice. Mana flowed into the skill and snow exploded into existence from my hand. Even the upgrade couldn't get rid of that requirement. The snow appeared deceptively mundane, but carried a great deal of power inside of it. Smaller and more compact than the snowflakes I usually made, the palm-sized flakes flew out from my hand in great arcs that looped around me. They flew with a mind of their own and only required minimal guidance from me by either nudging the skill or direct action from ice manipulation. That was a good thing too, because the skill kept pouring out snow the longer I channeled mana into it, creating a sea of white as it drank in the mana I was giving it. The skill changed in unexpected ways, vying farther away from the initial skill than I thought possible. You have upgraded a skill. Sweeping slash. Common. Dash sweeping snow. Uncommon. It took the changes I wanted and took them one step further. It changed the target of the skill from a handheld weapon to the snowflakes pouring from my hand. The only downside was they still had to originate from me, But that didn't seem all that bad from what I was seeing. That was the first thing I found a workaround for during my testing. The wave was the perfect time to test my new skill to discover all the ins and outs, and I wouldn't let this time go to waste. The snow had to originate from me, that was undeniable, but what constituted as me? Could I produce it from my hammer? Have it come out of my armor? The answer to those questions was yes. As I grew in strength, there was a rising feeling of comfort with the ice I used. Not the chunks I threw around as projectiles, the ice I used more intimately. The ice in my hammer and armor. They became almost an extension of myself, bathing in and becoming saturated with my law and spirit as I fought with them. With the growing connection, skills flowed through them more easily, and for this one, both could be substituted as my body. Snow formed on the surface of my armor before leaping out to join the rest of the storm I had conjured up in an endless flurry of activity. The snow ran its course quickly. The mana holding it together and fueling its flight dissipated rapidly. After the mana ran out, the snow would break apart into a multitude of mundane snowflakes and flutter to the ground. This prompting me to continue making more of it and draining my mana quite quickly for a lower rarity skill. The skill itself changed dramatically. No longer did it create gangly mana blades that extended out from the snow in thin blades. The mana enhanced the ice the snow was made of, making it sharper and easier to cut things with. Where it lost its reach, it increased its sharpness, losing the breadth of the skill for an increasing depth in another area. Combined well with my other skills, I could let it blow around me while I focused on melee, letting the snow cut and devastate whatever was in the area. Overall, the skill didn't change much in lethality, but I had high hopes for it. The snow left too shallow of wounds to do any real damage, but that could be fixed. At least it was usable now. With my testing done, the rest of the wave died quickly. Playing around with my new snow more than I should have led to a few wounds, but nothing too serious. The mini-bosses took a little more oomph to take down than what the little snowflakes could handle. With my new skill thoroughly tested, it was time to end things. I had things to do and time waited for no man. "Are you absolutely certain this is going to work?" Abigail said for the umpteenth time. "Yes, Abigail. For the millionth time it's going to work." My tone was dripping with annoyance. While I understood the doubt, it looked poorly constructed, but it was beginning to be annoying rather than comforting. Ever since the end of the wave and I arrived back at the wind chamber, she had been going over everything. Again. The previous checks were somehow not enough. With the amount of worry she was showing, I was surprised gray hairs weren't sprouting from her head. The rectangular box of wood had glowing lines running all over its length with mana stones powered and glowing sticking out of it. The wood used was some oak equivalent that Braden claimed would hold up well to wind. The hardwood was anchored deep into the earth for support and was giving the go-ahead by my fellow builders. We were about to test that claim. Before she could say something else or utter the same exact question again, I stepped inside the chamber. It was built tall enough to accommodate my 6-foot-tall form, with the ceiling resting a few feet above my head. Latching the door shut behind me made me starkly aware of how heavy-duty the latch was. Thick rods of metal connected the two slabs of wood together. It felt like it would hold up against even my strength for a time before failing. Vinny didn't hold back on the latch. The 4 wooden walls closed me in without anyone else to witness the bloody affair this was about to become. Disrobing as quickly as I could, I wanted to get this over and done with. Fear was the mind killer and I didn't want to let it build up. Clothes would only get ripped to shreds from what I was about to do. Standing in my birthday suit was a bit odd, knowing that outside the chamber countless people looked on with curiosity. If the walls fell down, they would be in for a treat. Let's hope Braden built them sturdy enough for that not to happen and matched the integrity of Vinny's latch. I gave the technique booklet one last skim before I was ready to turn everything on. Borealis. The northern wind body refining boasted a range of different benefits, raising my wind affinity, and to a lesser degree my ice affinity, while also making slashing attacks harder to penetrate the body. Where I didn't get the poison resistance Mitchell received, cutting attacks would need more power to get through my skin and muscles after this. My body would be particularly strong to wind blades and skills like it. What it all boiled down to was using both gale force winds and small, sharp hail-like ice to rip and shred the body to pieces. A very pleasant and lovely experience that I was at the edge of my seat for. Like the grinding down of a sandstorm, but instead of sand, little pieces of ice were used. The first thing I channeled my mana into was hail, sea, and permafrost, to create the ice I needed and the temperature required. Ice manipulation, evened all of the bits out into irregular shapes with some truly wicked edges. To make sure that they were able to damage my body, I channeled both my law and spirit into the ice for increased durability. I wasn't sure if it would be able to do its job without it. Thinking about getting pummeled with it was less than pleasant. The room was big enough that the wind would circulate throughout, looping back to hit me over and over again, and was built to facilitate exactly that. While rectangular on the outside, it was circular on the inside. The space between the outside walls and inside walls was filled with different plates and pieces to wire everything together. Well, not a wire exactly, but it was close enough to call it that. Mana needed to flow from one side of the formation to the other through channels engraved on the various pieces, and I didn't want those exposed for people to touch. It was already sketchy enough, and that was without people having access to the insides of the formation. The lines carved into wood that were visible on the outside were durability runes for the wood itself. I added a little extra to the wood to make sure this thing didn't fall about mid-operation. After creating the hail that the wind would need, it was time to power up the next set of runes. The ice and frost runes carved into the ground. Permafrost, could lower the temperature around me, but that wasn't enough to harm me. Some extreme measures were needed for me to get damaged by low temperatures. After getting my bloodline, even the coldest of temperatures weren't enough to bring harm. This combination of runes was a thorn to get right. It needed to be enough to damage my body, but not too much that the body refining process was done by the ice instead of the wind. Glacial presence made the whole thing that much more difficult to tune correctly. The northern wind's technique needed a careful balance of the two to do what it intended. It needed the cutting wind chill the cold provided, but not so much that it was the dominating factor. The exposed loops of ice covering the floor plunged the temperature inside the room well below zero. The ice making up the runes didn't need to be buried like the previous time I made one, and seeing the sharp increase in effectiveness made me cringe. I hadn't known that burying the rune caused that much of a loss. The increase in effectiveness also came from the string of runes that I tied together to make it better than one big frost rune. It was hard to find an off switch for the ice and frost runes, so I had to isolate them somewhat, making the room itself separated from the outside atmosphere. Otherwise, the runes would work endlessly to bring the environment in line with what the runes meant, wasting mana to cool the whole area outside the chamber rather than the small room I needed it to. The barrier was a base formation that one could buy from the store. While it was meant to defend from outside attacks, it worked for the purposes I needed it to. A bit overkill really, but it saved me time from having to learn to separate the two manually. All around the room, various runes lit up on the walls and ceiling to contain the frosty temperatures radiating outward. With the runes contained, the room quickly plummeted in temperature even faster than before. I knew from testing various lines on the outside lit up during this, and I had to assume people knew it was starting. All the heat was exorcised in ferocious vigor. Saturating the room with my law turned the crusade almost feral. The pervading aspect worked to drive the ice mana into a frenzy, eliminating and infiltrating anything that wasn't itself. The wood lining the room frosted over and began to contract, creaking and groaning from the treatment. Braden built the room with the contraction in mind, making the wood slot right into place from the planned contraction. That contraction was tested extensively to make sure that everything would stay where it was intended. Glacial presence climbed to new heights that I hadn't felt the skill reach before. It was hard to keep the grimace off my face from the increasing stats the skill gave. The skill boosted all of my stats, and that wasn't something I wanted right now. The harder it was to break down my body, the longer this whole process would take, and the more painful this experience would turn out to be. While it would be painful anyway, prolonging that pain wasn't what I wanted. As much as I had been injured lately, a masochist I was not. Pain was inevitable, though, and it wasn't something I could fix. The skill didn't have an on-off switch. It worked always. If I was able to turn it off, I hadn't been able to figure it out yet. When the temperature drop reached its peak, Chills ran through my body for the first time in a long time. My breath turned foggy and my body started to shiver. I felt cold. It was almost shocking. I hadn't felt even the slightest chill ever since the tutorial began, and it was weird to feel it again. After the first two formations were up and running where they needed to be, it was time to start the main event. The lines that had lit up before were a drop in the bucket compared to what happened now. Like going from low beams to high beams in a car. The bright LED kinds too. The new light show started to create gusts of wind along the walls of the room. All the wind runes faced clockwise in direction, adding the gusts together, building on top of each other. The planks the runes were engraved on jutted out of the wall like fan blades, all angled inward slightly in the same direction, only extending a few feet in but created a fearsome speed of wind when given time to accumulate. It felt similar to a tornado touching down right in the center of the rune, and the winds even started to push me back. As the winds grew in strength, I strapped myself to the grate that was installed. For the wind to be strong enough to hurt me, it was plenty strong to push me off my feet. We planted a grate deep into the earth to act as an anchor, something for me to stand against for support while also letting the wind through unimpeded. A huge slab of metal would have disrupted the flow too much and done more harm than good. Waiting for the wind to pick up gave me a surprise I hadn't seen coming. The force of the wind was enough to influence my control over the ice. It tugged on them, forcing me to tighten my grip over them to keep them from flying away. I hadn't had wind do that before and wasn't something I had thought could happen. Releasing my control over the ice, I let the pellets of hail fly. The pellets began their circuit, and every revolution would result in my bare body being pelted with them. While harmless at first, it quickly began to increase in intensity. Beginning at a slight annoyance, rising to a small pain, then higher. It felt like getting hit by paintballs for a while before the winds whipped them faster around the room. Not long after, they began to draw blood. The small protrusions of the ice cutting at just the right angle. Grunts sounded out from me when they hit a particularly sensitive spot, like my face or other areas. The wind built and built until the gusts themselves began to carve into me. The wind chill rose with the speed of the wind, and it was worse than I imagined. I knew this would be painful, but this was beyond even that. The cold was the most surprising. Ever since gaining my ice affinity and harnessing it for my powers, I hadn't thought it would be able to damage me like this. This experience took my blinders off and showed me my naivete. The cold was a harsh mistress, and just because I handled it better than most didn't mean it couldn't hurt me. I had to assume from the outside the place felt like a bomb waiting to go off from all the mana being used. To accelerate the winds this much took some real strength. Almost every wind rune was tied to its own mana stone to keep them powered long enough for the process to complete. Blood started leaking out of me at a trickle before quickly rising to a stream, then to a river. My shivering reached teeth-clattering levels, and I already wanted it to be over. Only a few days to go. Ugh, this was gonna suck. Chapter 118: Pain and Castles. Pain. Pain was a constant in life. It crept up anywhere it wasn't wanted. Joint pain, back pain, any kind of pain. It followed people around chronically in some instances. For me, my life wasn't full of pain. There was the occasional scrape and bump here and there, but generally my life was pain-free. The worst was the rare sprains or bruises from when I did something particularly stupid. Sometimes while alcohol was involved. Alright, mainly when alcohol was involved. It was hard to justify some of the injuries I received otherwise. There were a few times that stuck out in my memory that were particularly painful. Breaking my arm when I was a kid, a car accident when I was a teenager, a migraine flu combo that lasted a week in college. After the tutorial arrived, pain was a dull constant while fighting. Wounds built here and there that now crisscrossed my body in white lines. Scars that healed from one injury or another. A claw swipe here and a bite mark there. One of the biggest that marred my form was the mandibles that took chunks out of my side, leaving a patch of discolored skin from where it healed over. What I couldn't see was the 3-inch vertical line that ran parallel to my spine. The thin line told a tale of a grievous wound, one that I didn't like thinking about. It reminded me of who was lost that day. Electrical burns that covered some of my arms were difficult to think about for the same reason. Each had their own story, and by this point, I couldn't remember them all. Learning to deal with the pain was still something I worked on. Every warrior had to learn that pain was inevitable, but that was easier said than done. I had long rid myself of my urge to flinch in the face of it though. Coming a long way from the man who first entered the tutorial who flinched at the horn of a level 1 rabbit. Looking back on that moment made me want to laugh, if not for the mind-numbing scrapping pain from ice and wind ripping into me. The me of the past had been so afraid of pain, he hid behind a shield for the whole wave and did it again for the wave after. Turning off that flinching reflex came with time and experience. I wouldn't say I was perfect at it, there was always room to grow, but I was happy with how far I had come. The scars covering me were the proof of that. Proof of my effort to become a better warrior. Now, I got to watch as every line and discoloration was scrubbed from my body with vigorous enthusiasm. The skin broke down first before the ice and wind scraped deeper, breaking further inside. It was excruciating. It was also kind of sad. To keep my thoughts off the mind-numbing pain, I focused on the scars that were disappearing before my eyes. The stories that they told, the tale of survival that my family had embarked on. Been forced on. It was possible to get rid of them while evolving. Austin had discovered that, and a particularly strong healer could do the same, but I never felt the need. I wanted to keep them. It was a reminder of what we had accomplished. What I had accomplished. It was the trophies I had of hard-won battles and victories. Maybe that was why I liked the trophies hung in our keep. We kept skins, claws, skulls, or anything else worthwhile of the foes we had defeated. They lined the keep, telling our story of survival and triumph. Some thought it was barbaric. Diana had been a particularly loud advocator of that stance, but most were in agreement. Tracy certainly hated it. Her keep didn't have any of the trophies that ours did. I had asked her about it once and she looked appalled, like the mere idea sickened her. Something told me deer heads weren't a decoration in her house from before. They weren't in mine either, but that was for a different reason. Deer heads weren't the same. Hunting a deer with a bow or rifle wasn't the same as battling a bear or lion in melee. Half of the reason to keep the trophy was for the story of the battle, at least I thought so. It was a physical object to point at on the wall and say I defeated that in combat. Maybe it was a bit vain, but I liked it, and there were so few things like that after the world ended. The marks of battle that covered my form were all gone now. Only the deepest had hints that remained, scrubbed away by 1,000 little pellets of ice and wind. A wind that cut deeper every second. No amount of effort or will was going to get me through this. This wasn't something you could grit your teeth and stoically march through. It was hell. In every sense of the word. Tears rolled down my cheeks before those two were ground down before they had the chance to fall. It took everything in me not to pass out. My job wasn't done and I couldn't let the technique fizzle out. Keeping the flow of energy in line with what the technique detailed was easy at first, but got increasingly hard as the pain continued. My head wasn't as clear, and my mind wasn't as sharp. Slips started to occur that were hard to rectify. Lapses in control that the pain caused started to break me down. Every lapse would add time to the agony I would have to endure, taking extra time to redo that part of the body over again until I got it right. It was like that until the first healing spell hit me from the outside. The soothing energies offered a brief respite from the pain, only to plunge me back into the depths not long after. While working out the plan, one of the healers had a skill that could monitor my bodily functions from the outside. A mark that they put on me before the process started. Heart rate, oxygen levels, and whatnot. I wasn't sure exactly what they saw, but I imagined the monitors at a hospital. Every time it dipped toward critical, someone would use a healing spell from the outside. I had no doubt Abigail was out there fussing about, pacing back and forth waiting to launch such a spell. The thought of her worrying made me smile before I controlled that urge. The pain was the only thing that stopped me. Opening my mouth was out of the question. Even imagining one of the hail pellets hitting the back of my throat was enough of a threat to keep it clamped iron tight. No matter how many times I asked her not to worry, it was pointless. It wasn't in her nature. I had resigned myself to that years ago. That didn't keep the humor out of it though. Gah! A groan escaped me. Oh, that was rough. The skin on my legs ripped off, causing the muscle underneath to be exposed to the full body treatment. Blood splattered out of the exposed muscle, and not a second later, soothing energies worked their way through me yet again. The healing was a balm. It registered in my head that every time I was healed the process would take that much longer. But that wasn't something I worried myself with right now. Without the soothing energies, I would be little more than a heap of flesh. I was barely holding it together as it was, and that was with the healing every so often. The pain wasn't like anything I had experienced before. Pain in battle was different than this. That was endured to complete the action of fighting. There was something for me to push through, an objective to reach, a goal to work toward while grunting and grimacing. This didn't have anything to march toward or swing my hammer at. This was the slow and brutal restructuring of my body that I could do nothing but stand and endure, only left to hope and pray it would end soon. Time was a figment of my imagination now. Only pain and suffering to keep me company. Standing against the great as I was, I could feel my spirit work through my body, invigorating it, making it stay together as best it could. As long as I was standing, I could make it through this. Eyes closed and fists clenched, I endured. Blood flowed liberally out of me after every blade of wind, nip of cold, and grind of ice. My body fought to reconstitute itself while simultaneously trying to shiver from the cold. It didn't know whether to regrow skin here or protrude goosebumps there. My teeth grunted and grit 1 second only to start clattering the next. My mind didn't know whether to focus on the pain or the cold. The constant pain was the only thing that I had to keep me company during my isolation. But even after a while, that too became only a dull reminder. The constant pain was reduced to a muffled ache after what felt like a day. Spikes of pain reminded me it was still there and it would never truly go away, but the same level of pain got easier to tolerate the longer it went on. Like building up a resistance. It wasn't truly building up a resistance, but portions of my body completing the process and resisting the damage better than before. What I was left with was the chilling cold. The wind chill that pierced through me that never went away. It was funny. This was the feeling that I had been chasing when I upgraded my law, and now I was experiencing it in excruciating detail. The cold that settled into your core and seemed like it would never go away. A wind chill so brutal your body starts to turn blue from frostbite. My extremities never got a chance to harden from frostbite before being ground down by the wind. Throughout it all, I'm still standing was the only thing I could think. It all came back to the reason I was doing this. I needed the best evolution possible, and for that to happen, I needed to do everything I could. That included enduring asinine amounts of pain. I endured so my family wouldn't have to. When I evolved, I would be strong enough to protect them through what would no doubt be a rocky time in history. There was little doubt that there would be fighting in every corner of the world. Everyone would want to carve out a piece of the pie, stake their claim on the world. I couldn't fault others for it, for I would do the same. That thought, above all others, was what kept me going. Imagining the city I would build, a bastion that would defend my family, an impenetrable fortress that would stand for generations to come. Even after I was long gone, something I did would stand to defend my family. It was hard not to think about. The impregnable fortress through history flitted through my head: Constantinople and Castel Sant'Angelo, Le Mont Saint-Michel and Edinburgh Castle, along with other European medieval castles and Asian fortress cities. Even castles from fantasy made their appearance. Minas Tirith and Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings, along with Storm's End and the Vale from Game of Thrones. Finding the perfect place would be difficult, but I had ideas for that. Austen's profession would help tremendously. Pain spiked and threatened to overtake my mind, and I struggled to push it away. I didn't want to focus on the pain. I wanted to focus on what the pain would bring me. Like my very own castle. What person didn't want a castle? Distracting myself with my fantasies was the only thing I could do to not pass out or go insane. I had been in this chamber for what felt like days. Yet it still continued ripping away at me. Part of me was scared that after I was out, a slight breeze would bring back memories. After this was done, I never wanted to think about it again. There was crying and sobbing, yelling and cursing, pleading to gods I didn't even know. Nothing worked to ease the pain. I didn't even know what day it was. There was a chime of something in the background, but that didn't stop the assault on my body. It continued endlessly. I didn't have a chance to program an off switch from the inside. There was only a kill switch on the outside so the people out there could turn it off if something went wrong. The booklet that detailed the technique gave estimations of how long it would take depending on a list of different factors. My fortitude and endurance, how intense the winds would be, if there were breaks involved, things like that. It took me a minute to connect the sound of the chime with the realization that the process was complete. My mind was so out of it that it didn't instantly connect the two. There was only one glaring problem. The chamber was still on. Without anything left to fight for, a reason to stay standing, I let the black take me. Anywhere to get away from the pain. Chapter 119 Thoughts from the Heart. When I came to, the first thing I did was pull up my status sheet. I needed to know that the ding I heard was the body of wood notification and not something else. If it wasn't the case and I had to go through all of that again, I wasn't sure I would make it. Body stage upgraded. Unranked - body of wood, northern winds body. Even with the notification saying I did it, I pulled up my status to make double sure. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, F, human. Class, F, champion of Niflheim. Rare, level 50. Profession, F, runic blacksmith. Uncommon, level 44. Affinity, ice. Faction, Zelensky family. Temporary, faction head. Strength, 425. Agility, 230. Perception, 114. Fortitude, 358. Endurance, 162. Vitality, 135. Intelligence, 103. Wisdom, 204. Acumen, 74. Free points, 0. Laws, lesser law of ice. Body stage, body of wood, northern winds body. Spirit stage, anchor formation. My stats hadn't changed much, but there were a few new additions to the bottom of my sheet. Spirit stage unlocked after I formed my anchor, and now body stage was on the list. The to-do list I had set out to finish before my evolution was complete. The only thing I had left to do was level up my profession. It had leveled a lot during the building of the chamber, but I still had 6 more to go for a perfect evolution. Rushing to evolve was unnecessary, but I wanted to level again. To feel myself grow. I didn't want to waste the experience of the last wave since there was bound to be a lot of it. That many monsters in the E-rank were going to give quite the haul of essence. After everything I went through, and all the new strength coursing through me, the last wave didn't worry me anymore. It would be just another fight. Another battle just like any other. One where I would be left standing. Or I wouldn't. The 29th wave was almost child's play, and I was looking forward to the challenge the last would pose. Shuffling sounds from next to me drew my attention, and I watched Abigail walk into my Austin's lodge. How long was I out? My voice was hoarse and gravely, but I needed to know how long I was out to plan what I would do next. The chamber was set to run for just under 3 days. The longest it was supposed to take was 65 hours so that I would have some time to recover before fighting the final wave. Since I finished before the chamber turned off, I didn't know how long it had taken. Just over a day. We were shocked at how quick it was too. Nothing we read indicated that it would be over so soon, and we are still trying to figure out why. The leading theory is because we didn't have to heal you that much, but other than that, we don't know. She sounded upset. An upset Abigail was not good for anyone. What's wrong? I asked. You know what's wrong, she muttered. A heavy sigh escaped my lips. She had tried to get me to not go through with it, but I did it anyway. She read what was going to happen, the technique described it in exacting detail. She also knew the pain that it would cause. My excuse of it was necessary didn't work on her anymore. The line of being necessary and something I thought was necessary was blurring, and she didn't always agree. I was so far above them in strength that she didn't think clawing for more was needed. I did. There was no way to get over that differing of opinion, and we both tried to be civil about it. Sigh. A sigh of her own sounded out, and she deflated. Look, I just don't like seeing you hurt. You throw yourself into danger for our sake and come back covered in blood. The scars you had weren't from arts and crafts I made to defend myself, but she continued over me. I'm working through it, but it's hard. It hurts to see you in pain. To know you're doing it for us. For me. She sounded almost dejected. We both know what awaits us when we get back. We've read the same information. We need strength now more than ever. I said back. I know, Chris, I know. She said softly. I'm trying to get over it, but it's difficult. How would you feel if it was me getting hurt all the time instead of you? Terrible, that was how, but there was no way I was telling her that. I would throw myself in the line of fire 100 times before she had to once. If it ever came to that. I sat there in silence. This wasn't the first time we had this conversation, and we both knew where the other stood. In that silence, Abigail checked me over before giving me the all-clear. The healers worked to fix me up after I passed out, and they did a marvelous job of it. There wasn't any pain in my body as I moved around and stretched my limbs. After she left, I went over my body in more detail to see if there was anything different. When Mitchell went through his procedure, there was nothing visible afterward other than a feeling that he gave off, and I wanted to check if mine was different. Rachel had been trying to get me better at reading auras, but I didn't have the time for it. She said that the feeling I got from other people was the aura they gave off. The only thing different about Mitchell was that he felt a little stronger to my senses, but that was about it. No discoloration or other visible indicators of poison. The same was true for my body. Nothing was different other than it felt stronger. My body felt more sturdy than before, and like I could take a sword swing to my bare chest and would be fine. I would have to test it to see the effectiveness, but I felt great. The only visible difference between my body before compared to now was that my scars were mostly gone. They weren't gone entirely, but most had faded so much they weren't visible. The big ones were still there, but that was it. It was a tad disheartening, but it cleaned out room for new ones. For the fights I would have in the future. It was late in the afternoon of day 86, and by all accounts, the process was surprisingly quick. I thought it would have taken a while longer to finish. None of us realized getting healed prolonged it as much as it did. Now the only thing left to do was test my body and do as much forging and enchanting as humanly possible. I knew how many levels I needed to get before evolving and had set up a way to power level before going under. Finished products gave more experience than anything else, and I sought to exploit that. I imposed a little on Vincent, but he was happy to help. The plan was for him to forge countless weapons only until they were most of the way done. That way, I could come and finish them quickly before engraving runes on them. We would share the experience, but it was faster than forging from scratch. Plus, that way, I would get the experience from finishing the weapon from forging and then more from engraving runes on them. Double the experience from half the work. There was certainly some sort of penalty in terms of total experience for what I was doing, but it should still put me out ahead in the long run. 6 levels in a day and a half. How hard could it be? Pound the metal, flip the metal, quench the metal, engrave the metal. Repeat. Pound the metal, flip the metal, quench the metal, engrave the metal. It was mind-numbingly repetitive, but the results spoke for themselves. Congratulations. You have leveled up. The first few were easy to get, but I ran out of pre-prepared works quicker than I would have liked. Vinny hadn't had that much of a head start and didn't have all the time in the world to prepare new ones for me. We ran dry halfway into day 87, making me switch to other things. I did all kinds of things trying to scrape the last few levels into existence. Enchanting buildings, walls, and weapons people were already using. Making as many swords as I could in the forge. I paid a premium for higher-tiered materials trying to speed the process up. My skills were taking a hit from the rush jobs, but the experience was good. Without focusing on the process, my skills didn't have a chance to upgrade and would be behind in rarity compared to my rank. Most were still in the common tier, while Vinny's were mostly rare. There would be time to fix it later, though. The only other thing I had to prepare for was the material I was going to use while evolving. Austin used the wings of a golden eagle and Jonathan used the shell of stone turtles. Mine was a touch different. It wasn't animals we were talking about, but humanoids. It was a little creepy to consider the body part one would be integrating into myself. Different parts would do different things, and there was a lot to consider. Price was another thing, but I didn't have to worry about that, thankfully. My points alone weren't enough to buy all possibilities, but with the help of my family, we had enough for anything in the store. There was also something else to consider. Stronger body parts had a chance of failure, but I felt like I could take a bit more than most. My stats, body, and spirit felt more robust than what most people could handle. There were so many things that I still needed to decide and not that long to do it. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Another chime signaled that time was coming nearer. As soon as I hit level 50, I would be evolving and I had to make a decision. Ugh, why did deciding have to be so hard? A part of me just wanted to be told what to do or for there to be only one option. It would make things a hell of a lot easier. I had an idea of what I would use, but it wasn't set in stone yet, and there was still time to consider other avenues. My mind was nothing if not actively pondering. The smithing didn't take a lot of deep thought, which left it free to doubt and question all the ideas I had come up with. The body part one was considering the most was the heart. I felt like the heart made the most sense to start with. Frostborn, or frost giants for that matter, didn't have wings to consider or shells to use. They were mostly humanoid and had mostly human-like parts. Some were made of ice or were more magically inclined than others, but a great number were flesh and blood just like me, especially in the lower tiers like I was in. The heart of a frost giant was where most of their magic resided, where they drew power from the cold and where the strength of their bodies started. They still had monstrous muscles and strong bones, but it all started with the heart. They were almost like dragons in a sense. Dragons had some of the sharpest claws and most indestructible scales in existence, but their most prized part was their heart. It was where most of their magic resided and the place their famous dragon's breath came from. Nothing could compare to a dragon's fire. Frost giants didn't have a famous breath attack that they used, but they did have magics of their own. Great powers with ice and frost that came from their hearts. If I started there, the rest of the body would come later. It would boost the function of my heart and give strength to the rest of my body. If I started with the muscles, the rest of my body wouldn't be able to keep up. It would be harder on every other body part to keep up with my enhanced muscles if I did that. My mind worked through the different things I could do with it. Austin and Jonathan both went the temporary route, building upon their bloodline so their changes would only surface when they called on it. Austin wouldn't sprout wings randomly and Jonathan wouldn't grow a turtle shell. They would only show up when they needed them to and were called on. A heart was different. It wasn't wings I needed to conjure at certain times and put away at others. It wasn't a noticeable change that was visible for people to see. The main question in my mind was, would it change me? Not knowing the answer to that question killed me. Congratulations. You have leveled up. The time to evolve was drawing near. Chapter 120 Evolution. Is that him? I asked Abigail, who was standing next to me. Both of us were watching the new group of people file through the gate. Yeah, they say he's already in the E rank with a powerful class. We aren't sure what rarity, but it's rare at the bare minimum, most likely epic. Abigail answered. When we heard that a merge with the last standing faction was a possibility, Abigail worked to get all the information she could about the faction's strength. Their numbers, average level, level of the leader, things like that. She couldn't find out everything, but she managed to get a decent amount. We knew the leader, Kurt, was evolved, but not how far into the E rank he was. I didn't think that he would agree to Tracy's terms. I wasn't privy to the exact wording of the agreement, but I figured it was similar to what she and I had. He spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to hold onto his pylon only to give up a wave away. He didn't look happy about it. There were a few people close to him whispering something, but I wasn't close enough to hear. They seemed like advisors or something close to that, and if I had to guess, it was them that made the merge happen. The man scowled as he walked at the head of his camp's procession, leading them through the southern gate of Tracy's camp and to the area that was cleared out for them. They numbered around 60 people altogether, which was over triple what our faction was. It was just shy of how many Tracy had, which put them at a close second for total number of members. She had over 80 members still alive and kicking. All the surviving members of the tutorial were now in one place. The man looked in his mid-30s with brown hair extending past his ears and in need of a cut. It was obvious he usually kept it shorter than that, but there wasn't a barber to go to around here, nor the time. His beard was scruffy and in the same disrepair as his hair and looked like he usually kept it clean-shaven. That wasn't saying it looked bad, but it was easy to tell he wasn't used to having one. At this point, my beard was getting a bit out of hand. I usually kept it cropped tight to my face, but that was thoroughly abandoned now. It looked closer to the bushy forest I usually ended no-shave November with than the tightly cropped beard I normally kept. Same with my hair, it was well past where I usually cut it, wild and unstyled. Appearance took a back seat during our time in the tutorial. We were similar in our dishevelness. His figure didn't immediately stand out, but it radiated power. His armor was light compared to what I usually wore, more leather and cloth than metal, most likely relying on his body refinement to get him through fights. His get-up was either dyed a sandy brown or came that way from the beast or store. Most likely the natural color to blend in with the sandy desert of the south. I expected a heavier armor on the man, but that didn't seem to be the case. Or he could have an armor skill like I did that negated the need. I still wore it for added protection, but it wasn't strictly necessary. I couldn't forget the variety of skills and what they can provide and assume he didn't have access to armor. The sword on his hip glistened in the sunlight and screamed quality. A hefty store-bought weapon, no doubt, and the shield on his back matched. A few dents and scrapes here and there to show its use, but overall well cared for. It looked freshly oiled and polished, his sword the same. He walked up to Tracy's welcome party and spoke tersely for a few moments before moving on with the rest of his camp. He led them to the space that was set aside for them and helped them settle in. From what we knew, he came here with his co-workers at a law firm, most of which were now dead. The rest of his camp consisted of others in the area who came to his camp for help. They didn't know about the increased difficulty at first, but then planned around it with the acrobatics they had people do with moving camps and all that. It was unclear whose idea that was. It could have been the man I was looking at now for all I knew. He gave off a powerful aura and I could feel its robustness. It was near Austin's in strength, almost higher actually. It was hard to get exacts with how it felt. It was also hard to evaluate Austin's because I would never fight him like that. It was different than evaluating a potential threat. He gave me an initial look when he walked in, but nothing more than that. Too busy with getting everything situated than evaluating me. Well, he looked like a solid fighter and his aura screamed warrior. It was nice to see I wasn't alone in my amount of strength and other people have reached as high as me. It didn't spell well for humanity if I was alone in the strength I possessed. I didn't think I was, but it was a nice change to feel someone outside my family with an aura that strong. Achieving what I was after, Abigail and I turned away to do something infinitely more important than eyeing the new members. It was time to evolve. "Do you have everything you need?" Austin giddily asked. He was jumping out of his shoes, wondering what my evolution would be like. He spent a not insignificant amount of time pestering me about it. He wanted me to look at the classes I was offered almost 1,000 times by now, and I refused him at every turn. I didn't want to know what I was offered just in case it changed the outcome. Maybe it was a childish notion that I would jinx it or ruin the surprise, but my evolution was important to me. I didn't want to mess it up somehow. Yes, I was as prepared as I could be. My family surrounded me, already through with the pep talk and explanation, even though I heard it not that long ago when Jonathan went through this. The ground was prepared and sanitized by someone's casting of cleanse, all in the effort to purify anything that could go wrong. The heart of a young frost giant resided next to my seated form, and I was ready. I wasn't sure how much of a tier differential my body could handle, but went with the young frost giant anyway. As a frostborn, it was 2 steps up, a large jump, but I felt like I could take it. My stats were high, I had a body of wood, lesser law, and a spirit anchor. I felt confident in using that high of a tier material without it going wrong. I had to help Tracy upgrade her pylon for it to become purchasable, but it was well worth it. We could only afford the 1 heart, but that would be more than enough. Being a higher tier than my bloodline made the material worth more. There was more weight to it when using it to evolve. Profession evolution available. I started with my profession. It was going to be the less rare of the two, and I wanted to get it over with. I hadn't had the chance to focus on it much with all the fighting that I did, which made it more underwhelming than my class. There were still feats of skill under my belt, like the wind chamber, but not as much as my class. The wind chamber was the most difficult thing that I built, and that was a hack job at best. Enchanter blacksmith, uncommon. Ward smith, uncommon. Formation smith, uncommon. Apprentice runic blacksmith, uncommon. Runesmith, rare. The list wasn't a surprise, and I knew roughly what would be on it. Information on professions was a lot easier to get a hold of than it was classes. I had deviated too far from the original 5 classes for most information to be relevant. My profession, though, was close to by the book. Going from blacksmith to runic blacksmith wasn't that rare, and there were detailed steps to the different professions from there. Runesmith was the one I was going for, and I made sure all the boxes were checked a while ago. Gaining experience from both forging and engraving. Forging a weapon of the common tier and enchanting it to become uncommon. Forged what was considered a great work utilizing runes in some capacity and having a unique forging style. The great work could have been a few things, but I knew that requirement was complete. I may have cheated and looked at the list to make sure. If I didn't tell anyone, then the secret would die with me, and that was what I intended. Austin would never know. Only my profession list though. My class was important and I didn't want to risk anything. The stats were just what I needed as well. +3 strength, +8 agility, +5 perception, +3 endurance, +8 intelligence, +10 wisdom, +6 acumen, +5 free points. The booklet that had the information on how to unlock the runesmith profession detailed the stats it would give, and there was actually a way to influence that. Similar to merchant in that respect. You couldn't swing too far away from the baseline, but depending on the work you did, the stats you would get could change. If you focus more on the smithing side, strength and endurance would be higher. The enchanting side would result in more magic stats. I earned most of my experience from engraving, so that was how the stats were skewed. That was on purpose because I expected my class to be heavy on the other side. It was a great way to even the two out. I locked in Runesmith rare and moved on to my class. I knew that the highest class I could be offered was legendary. We knew that it could only go up 2 varieties during evolutions, and you couldn't jump any higher than that. I just hoped that I had done enough to get one. The 5 options stunned me. The lowest was epic, with the other 4 all being legendary. Having for that high was a great boon, giving me a better choice for which one I wanted. Wringing every bit of advancement out of my rank was paying off. Not only 1, but 4 legendary classes to choose from. Class evolution available. Frostborn Warrior Shaman, epic. Reach closer toward the spiritual and lead them in battle. Summon and control frost and ice elementals for a short period of time to fight by your side in battle. Can fight both on the front lines and with magics from afar. Requirements: great ice affinity, least law of ice, body refined using ice in some manner, frostborn bloodline. +8 strength, +5 agility, +3 perception, +4 fortitude, +3 endurance, +3 vitality, +8 intelligence, +7 wisdom, +5 acumen, +10 free. The first up was the epic. I didn't spend much time on it, but it sounded nice, I guess. I wasn't a big summoner kind of guy and probably wouldn't have taken this class even if it wasn't the lowest rarity. I did note the stat points though. From the others who evolved, we knew how many stat points the lower rarities gave for E rank. Common gave 32, uncommon gave 40, and rare gave 48. None of them were offered anything higher, but we were able to guess. It went up by 8 every rarity, and that held true. Both epic and legendary conformed to that pattern, with epic giving 56 and legendary giving 64. Next came the legendary classes, and boy were they a doozy. The 4 all sounded good, and I would only be able to pick one. Blizzard of the Frost Giant, legendary. Harness the powers of the mighty Frost Giant's breath. Both wind and ice leap at your fingertips to direct as you please. Use them to fight how you please, whether that be in melee or from range. Gaining this class necessitates significant permanent racial changes. Requirements: strong ice affinity, lesser law of ice, a trace frost giant bloodline, and frost giant material used while evolving. +10 strength, +6 agility, +4 perception, +8 fortitude, +6 endurance, +5 vitality, +8 intelligence, +7 wisdom, +10 free. Captain of the Borads, legendary. The Borads were an elite guard to the once King Boreas. They excelled at combat and were unmatched in the winter cold of their home planet. While most were warriors and weapon skills their forte, that didn't mean they were incapable of great magics as well. Captains were a step above the rest and also held stout commanding abilities to bolster their company. Requirements: strong ice affinity, lesser law of ice, body refined using ice and wind in some manner, leader title. Plus 13 strength, plus 5 agility, plus 4 perception, plus 8 fortitude, plus 7 endurance, plus 5 vitality, plus 7 intelligence, plus 5 wisdom, plus 10 free. Hammer of the Jotner, legendary. The strength of a once mighty race placed in the form of a hammer. The Jotner were famed warriors who specialized in heavy weapons and armor, wielding both to a masterful degree. Focuses on weapon and armor skills above all else. They stood alone at the peak of warriors for a time before their fall. Requirements: strong ice affinity, lesser law of ice, body refined using ice in some manner, trace Jotun bloodline, warrior spirit. Plus 16 strength, plus 6 agility, plus 4 perception, plus 10 fortitude, plus 10 endurance, plus 8 vitality, plus 10 free. Chilling death of Helheim, legendary. The dead give you strength. Grow in power the more death there is around you, snuffing out the heat of the living. Not focused on one style of combat in specific, but any that get the job done. Death is the goal, and the fastest way to get there is all that matters. Born from the blood of thousands and will grow with the blood of thousands more. Requirements: ice affinity, lesser law of ice, body refined, the blood of thousands reaped by your hand. Plus 5 strength, plus 5 agility, plus 5 perception, plus 5 fortitude, plus 5 endurance, plus 5 vitality, plus 5 intelligence, plus 5 wisdom, plus 5 acumen, plus 19 free. I had to go back and reread a few, but they all sounded like powerful classes. 2 gave me pause while reading them, and I wasn't sure I liked what they implied. Blizzard of the Frost Giant sounded like it required permanent alterations to my body, and I wasn't sure I liked that. My initial displeasure at the idea had abated somewhat, but that didn't mean I wanted to jump into a class like that head first. The other was Chilling Death of Helheim. What did it say about me that I was offered a class like that? It required the blood of thousands just to become an option. It would make fighting the waves a breeze if it worked like I thought it did, giving me a boost for every monster I killed. It would turn me into an army killer. Numbers would be meaningless if I could gain strength with every kill. I didn't know if I was comfortable with the last line though. Born from the blood of thousands and will grow with the blood of thousands more. It was wishful thinking to say my days of carnage and slaughter would be over when the tutorial ended, but I would surely be turning it down. I didn't know if I wanted a class that demanded blood and slaughter. It sounded sinister. Still, I had to make a decision and I wasn't sure which. I was leaning hard on one of them after reading the list initially, but I didn't want to be hasty. This would be my class for the foreseeable future. Most likely a year or so if the store was to be believed. It all depended on how quickly we got our feet under us after we returned. Ugh, these decisions are killing me. End of chapter 120.